You're listening to episode 84, How to Heal Using Body Intelligence and Mindfulness with Jane Clapp. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome to this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's always great to have you here. And if you're a new listener, thank you for tuning in as well. I hope that you enjoy the show. And this week I'm joined by Jane Clapp of janeclapp.com. And we're going to talk about body intelligence and mindfulness and how that can help us to heal from past trauma. So I think that you'll find it interesting and hopefully helpful to you as well. But before we get into it, I just want to mention that today's episode is brought to you by audible.com. Audible is the premier provider of digital audiobooks. I signed up with them to get you a free audio book download along with a 30-day free trial. They have over 180,000 titles, including some that have been mentioned on the show in the past, that you can choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or whatever you use as an MP3 player. So if this is something that interests you and you want to check it out, all you have to do is go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/audible, and you'll be able to go ahead and get your free audio download along with that 30-day free trial. So like I said, we're going to be talking about body intelligence and mindfulness today, and what that is and how that can help us to heal. This is something that Jane uses with her clients. She's also a survivor as well, and she's going to talk about how she grew up with intergenerational trauma and addiction and how that impacted her. And she's going to tell us about how she thinks that trauma is on a spectrum. And we're also just going to talk about the importance of happiness when healing and finding ways to have fun, because that's something that often gets neglected. And we're going to talk about how our bodies can shape our minds and why it's important for our overall well-being to keep our nervous system regulated and what that means exactly. And we're also going to talk about how self-care is important if we're highly sensitive. I consider myself to be a sensitive person, and my guess is that some of you listening are as well. So we get into that a little bit here as well. And overall, I think just lots of good stuff, lots of helpful information. And yeah, I just hope that you find it interesting and helpful for your situation. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into it. I'm going to bring Jane on, and I'll catch you in the outro. Jane, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to share your story with us.
Thanks for having me, Melissa.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. So you and I got connected on Twitter, but as it turns out, you also know a friend of mine, Guy McPherson, who show the Trauma Therapist podcast you've also been on. Mm-hmm. So that's cool. And I've listened to your interview with Guy, and I thought what you were talking about on there in regard to the work you do today was really interesting. And for those listening, Jane does work with trauma survivors using body intelligence and mindfulness to improve emotional and nervous system regulation. And Jane, I'm definitely excited to have you share about all of that with us today, because I think those listening will find it really interesting as well. But you're also a survivor yourself. And what I like to do here is have my guests first share with us about the trauma they've gone through so that we know where they're coming from. And then we'll go from there. How does that sound to you?
Sounds great.
Yeah. And I know that, you like to focus more on your healing and how you're helping others to heal and not as much on the details of what you've gone through. And that's perfectly fine. But if you could just kind of give us, a general overview of the type of background you're coming from, that would be great.
Great. I come from on both sides of my family. My grandmother was severely mentally ill. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia and I think a couple other concurrent mental health issues. So she was in hospital from the time my mom was about 6. And then my grandfather was a logger and an alcoholic. So my mom kind of spent a lot of time in other people's homes in the interior of British Columbia in a small town. So that unto itself creates a lot of opportunity for attachment issues in my mom, and then also, coping mechanisms that we kind of have to cope with as kids as well. And then on my dad's side, my grandfather was in World War II. He was bipolar, and he actually committed suicide in his 50s. But all of this wasn't really talked about when I was growing up. However, I was the middle of 3 and definitely more like on the sensitive side. I definitely call myself a highly sensitive person. So I kind of had extra antennae, and I also felt the need to really look out for my mom and try to protect my mom because she didn't have the tools and resources to really care for herself that well, even on the most like basic levels in some ways. So I definitely felt like I needed to be a caregiver for my mom. And then when there's addiction, both my grandfathers were alcoholics. When there's addiction in a family and there isn't sort of healing and step work or whatever type of recovery work done, there might not be a substance, but there are the codependent relationship patterns that are sort of passed on intergenerationally. So I've had to do a lot of work in my adult life to watch myself repeat patterns and then find different ways of trying to heal, both mentally and spiritually, and really bringing my body into the healing process as well, because I found that the years of psychotherapy I was doing didn't really stop kind of the broken record that was happening. And I knew that with my daughter, who's now almost 13, that I need to really try to stop the cycle of intergenerational trauma that was happening in my life, in my family.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing when there's intergenerational trauma, right, is that I guess you can have that fear that it'll keep continuing, right? And you have to, the onus is on you to find a way to break that cycle and make it stop, right? It puts extra pressure on you, I would say.
Yeah, and it's extra pressure, it's extra work. And I'm coming to realize, though, that when I look at trauma, I really look at it on a spectrum, that we all have trauma in our lives just from being human beings. And it is on a spectrum. So you can have more severe trauma. Trauma is also really determined by what kind of resources you have available to deal with it. And one thing I'm so grateful is that I am quite resourceful. So I haven't gotten to that point where I've just surrendered, Mm-hmm. I've been like, I am going to keep pursuing different ways of healing. And now at 43, I can see a lot of it was I'm tripping over my own feet, and I need to sort of separate from my history in some ways while embracing the impact it's had on me. But it's a tricky dance,
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. So what's been sort of the impact that it had on you? What are some of the ways that played out for you as you were growing up, as you were becoming an adult and everything?
I think until I left home, I was using a lot of different ways to numb out. Like I over-exercised for a few years and underate. I definitely, when I was a teenager, drank pretty heavily on the weekends as a way to tune out. And until I moved away from home when I was about 19, it was sort of like I had a lot of unthawing to do to kind of own my emotions and come back in contact with myself. When I guess I moved away from home second year university or college, as you guys say. And it was the beginning of a long process. But I think the way that it's manifested in my adult life the most has been in relationship patterns and feeling sort of like I needed to find some type of security and safety net out in the world. And so definitely getting into relationships that weren't the healthiest, or finding it hard to take my time in relationships because I was like in a desert and taking the first glass of water that was offered to me, you know?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you said there about how you had over-exercise, and
Mm-hmm.
I know this is something I've heard you talk about before, and how kind of fitness has been like a double-edged sword for you, right? In the sense that it can be a bad thing if you're like not doing it for the right reasons, or if you're using it to numb out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, right, that's something that a lot of people don't really think about. They think, well, all exercise is good. Could you kind of just, explain that to us a little bit, and how it can be bad, how it can be used in a more negative way?
Well, over exercise can definitely be a way to regain control. So it's the term, I think, in the DSM, although I don't love referring to the DSM, is hypergymnasia, where you over exercise to make up for binge eating, or you over exercise in calorie control. And it's actually a form of an eating disorder, because regardless of how you're feeling or what your body weight is, you can't really you can't stop the compulsion to need to exercise to feel okay. And I sort of put it in the realm of like, I mean, it's not at all the same as cutting, but it's sort of like if you can feel something other than your emotions in your body, and if it's intense and uncomfortable, it can be a bit of a distraction from other things you don't really want to face. So, I mean, in the fitness industry, it is quite rife with eating disorders and overexercise issues, because it can be hidden. So people in the industry can definitely hide that. But it's funny now, because I see a lot of people with different types of eating disorders, and my relationship with movement and exercise is sort of like, I have been doing it for so long in traditional workout environments that I just can't make myself exercise that way anymore. So I'm pretty healed in terms of needing to move, like a lot or more than is healthy for me. But whenever I meet people who need to move a lot and constantly like put more exercise on their body than is healthy, I'm always like, what are you running away from?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you can use movement and exercise as a way to tune in or tune out. And my work with my clients and the way I use my body is it's always to tune in.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so you've always been involved in fitness, it sounds like?
Well, I worked actually in human resources and labor relations. So I did a Bachelor of Commerce degree, business degree, and fired people. I worked at a trade union for a couple of years, and then early in my career in labor relations, I had to fire people, and I just got involved in conflict, which was funny, and I could deal with it, but I just wasn't excited about doing that. So I had been involved in fitness. I taught group fitness when I was 19. And then after I moved from Vancouver to Toronto, I'm like, well, it makes sense for me to try to earn a living while I'm figuring out what I want to do. So I'll become a personal trainer. And then I explored the arts and performance and was an actor for a while, but then came back to fitness full time because it was like, oh, well, it's there. It's what I'm good at. It's like what I would like to do. So that's sort of how we came back to it.
And is that something that's been really helpful for you in your healing?
I realized that over time, like I've had my own studio for about 10 years, and having a quiet space that I controlled and was a really safe container for people to come into and just be and kind of leave their mask at the door. I found that I really got a lot of vicarious resilience out of working with people as they're facing their lives, getting stronger, coming to terms with things, dealing with illness. So it's been sort of like vicarious healing being with people. And I also have to be, I'm not always awesome at it, but I have to be very grounded when I'm with people, especially if they're dealing with a lot. So it really helps me kind of feel connected to a purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it can be healing for us to help others as well,
Yes, and I've had to really work on appropriate boundaries in terms of I can be very close and intimate with my clients, but I have to remember that I'm not there to rescue them. I'm not there to solve their problems or proselytize. I'm there with them as an equal partner and a co-partner, and supporting them and offering them new ways of dealing with things, and coaching them how to move well and get back in their body in a really grounded way. But I have to leave the rest up to them.
Yeah, everybody has to, do their healing on their own, I think, and figure out what's best for them. And all we can do is just kind of give them resources and help them along the way. So what other things, aside from fitness, have helped you kind of, to get to where you are today? What things have you done to, work on some of the unresolved issues that you were dealing with?
Well, I mean, apart from psychotherapy, I really haven't taken that long a break from psychotherapy over the years. So that's always been a really important aspect of my healing process, and having that relationship, that trusting relationship there to help carry me. Last year, I started riding. So I have a riding lesson after I get off the phone with you, and I mean horses. So,
yep. Nice.
Yeah, not riding a bike, but riding horses. So, it's been incredible. I go off into the country because, Toronto's the biggest city in Canada, and it's quite congested. And I make my way out, through traffic, and then I get off the highway, and my heart opens up, and my whole kind of fascial system, my body just goes, and I get out of the car, and I give the horse a treat, and then groom them, tack them up, and I'm just learning how to be with them. But I'm also learning super fun stuff that has nothing to do with healing directly, or learning for anything other than something that brings me happiness. And I feel like that's such an essential part of any healing, is that we have to find something that almost helps us transcend ourselves and our past, and something that we are so looking forward to that we miss it when we don't do it.
Yeah. How often do you go out riding?
I go once a week because it's quite a ways, but I could ride every day. Like it's super fun. And I'm sort of dancing on the edge of being a little bit afraid when I'm learning new things, but it's also contained. And my coach is so incredibly patient and kind of layers on learnings that I know she's looking out for me. So I can do scary things and see that my fear wasn't actually real once I learn it. And it's just great. Like they're silly. Like I used to think horses were just these highly evolved creatures, and they are in some ways, but they also just are goofy, and they love treats and, getting scratched, and so they're really interesting and evolved, but also just kind of easy to please when you treat them well. So, but it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Today I'll probably ride outside, and a couple weeks ago I saw a couple deer in the field, and it's just, I feel like in healing from trauma, sometimes we really forget that joy and play is so essential, and that's what where we're actually trying to get to. Whether or not we can do it for a while, the ultimate goal is to really find pleasure and joy again, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And I love that you find that by being in nature. I mean, I think that's something that can be so healing for a lot of people, just to kind of get away from the craziness of your daily life, just take some time to yourself.
Yeah. And I find being involved really in learning something really helpful. So it's hard to just be when you have a pretty complex loaded history. Just go into nature and be. Sometimes learning a new skill is really important because it's so fully engrossing that you actually don't have a lot of room to think about things that you're used to thinking about. Like stand-up paddleboarding I do in the summer too, which is quite lovely because you have to be, you know what I mean by stand-up paddleboarding, right?
Yes. Yeah. Hopefully those listening do as well. But yeah, it's like, I mean, you're just standing on a paddle in the water, and or standing on a board and you're paddling yourself along.
Yeah. And that's really great too, because you actually have to pay attention depending on how calm the water is. But you're in nature, but you're also learning something, and or you're having to be present in your body while you're doing it. And the riding horses is like that. Like, you really have to be fully present in your body to make sure that the ride goes well and the horse is happy and that you feel really grounded. So yeah, I'm obviously big about bringing the body into our day as much as possible and into the healing process.
Yeah. And I want to talk more about the work that you're doing today. And I know, so I mentioned at the beginning that you're using body intelligence and mindfulness. So do you want to tell us a little more about that?
Certainly. Well, if we think of our body is sort of like our emotional container. So do you kind of follow me on that? So
I think so. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So if we think of when we have an intense emotional experience, normally there's like a concurrent place in our body where we feel it. But when we're really disconnected from our bodies and we aren't really moving through our day with grounded awareness and intelligence in our body, it's sort of like our cup for stress, our container for stress can feel a lot smaller. So we can get overwhelmed easier because we're kind of living from the neck up. But when we bring grounded body awareness into our day, into those moments where we have sort of an intense emotion as well, we can feel a greater capacity to hold our distress and hold our struggle and suffering. And it can help us not run away from it, not get involved in coping mechanisms that might be really unhealthy for us. So what I try to do with people is to help them feel how their body is working for them by getting them to learn new movement skills, engage in balance activities, move weight so that they can feel the strength that they already have, and then help them get stronger on top of that. So we forget that we have a body sometimes until we're in pain. And that's when we might start paying attention to our body. And what I'm saying is we need to actually bring a holistic awareness of our body into our day-to-day moments as much as possible.
So what's a good way for someone to kind of get started with that if that's something that they are interested in?
Well, I offered something, Become Your Own Rescuer program, and it was an online coaching form where I gave people tangible tools to get out of that kind of hyper arousal, when you feel really anxious, or hypo arousal when you feel shut down. So tools that they can use on the spot to get back into the present moment and out of that fight or flight or freeze mode. So things like you can kind of stand with your feet flat on the floor and just shake your knees and or bounce and just bring some awareness back into your body in a really grounded way, or stomp your feet rather, or push your hands up against the wall. There's like really easy tools that you can use, anybody can use without being a movement expert, or even just putting a squishy ball under your foot so that you can really have a sense that your body is there. And instead of getting caught up in, those feelings in your body that are associated with emotional pain or anxiety, you can feel something else other than that quite quickly.
Yeah, sounds interesting. And it sounds like it's something that really anybody could do. I mean, it seems like there are different exercises or movements that they can do no matter kind of what level they're at.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the trickiest part is when we need to help ourselves, it's the hardest time to mobilize our resources. So when we're feeling our worst is the time that we need some type of intervention or movement activity or mindfulness activity. But so many people, and me included sometimes, I get almost like frozen, like it takes a mountain, feels like moving a mountain to mobilize myself to do the things that I know are really good for me. And it's just about forming new habits. So at first it feels like moving a mountain. Then the more you start engaging in things that get you back in your body and get up and move, the more it just becomes a habit, like brushing your teeth. It's hard at first. And I think finding support to do that is really, really important. Even like writing down coping strategies somewhere where you can see it is really, really helpful. Because otherwise we just get stuck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can definitely be tricky sometimes to get ourselves to start moving and to start doing the things that can help us when we need it the most.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yeah, definitely trying to create habits can help us get around that, you know. So tell us about like the work that you do today with the business that you've going on with Urban Fit, right? Tell us a little more about that.
I operate this open space studio, kind of in the heart of Little Italy. There's a lot of creatives and film and TV people and artists around. So that's sort of my demographic. People come to see me privately. I don't teach any classes anymore, just professional training classes. And so people come to see me often. By the time they come to see me, most of my clients are feeling quite awful. They're not going to pay to see someone like me unless they're already feeling quite distressed and really feeling desperate to feel different. So what I try to do with people first and foremost is get them into present moment awareness. Most people are coming in either sort of shut down or stressed and anxious, one of those two. So I'll use tools that help them kind of become more present in their body, but it doesn't involve a lot of sitting. It doesn't involve a lot of meditating because most people just aren't getting enough movement in their day. So if I get people who've been sedentary all day to come and sit and do still mindfulness activities, it doesn't really fit with where their bodies are at. So some sessions I just get people to do balance work so that they have to kind of clear their minds and focus on staying on a Bosu ball, for example. But what I'm eventually working with especially is making sure that people have less physical pain. A lot of people with a history of trauma have a lot of pain issues, I found as well, and health conditions. So I help people kind of balance out the tension forces or tensegrity in their body so that they can move with more ease in their day-to-day life and feel less vulnerable and fragile out in the world. So, strength from the inner core muscles is really essential. Strength around your spine, working on posture and alignment, and all the major kind of movement patterns that our body is designed for can really reinforce a sense of emotional and psychological resilience in people. And that's where I'm trying to get my clients to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what we're really talking about here is just that mind-body connection, right?
Yeah.
And I know that you say that the body is one of the most powerful alchemic tools for shaping the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, I feel that we're still putting brain over body, that we're really looking to change the brain by looking at the brain. And there's a whole level of information and intelligence in the body that we're cut off from because of mild or moderate or severe dissociative tendencies to cut ourselves off from feeling. But also because we're in a crisis of disembodiment in our society. We look at movement, body awareness as a nice to have instead of a survival mechanism. We're cut off from our neuroception, which is sort of our body's innate ability to assess safety in an environment. And people with a history of trauma especially get their body kind of misfires, or they don't get the accurate and specific information back up from the body. So going in through the body to change the mind is absolutely effective in my experience. But we can't expect people with a history of trauma to all of a sudden want to pay attention to their body, because there's a lot of information that we store in our body that we might not be ready to absorb. So moving, learning new movement patterns, feeling stronger sensations in your body can help you want to be present in your body again. And it doesn't have to be distressing.
Right, because that can be the biggest challenge, right? That it is distressing thing. And of course, when it feels that way, then that's something that you try to avoid and not go towards.
Exactly. So I actually try to help people feel as much pleasure, joy, and confidence in their body as possible. So when that happens, they can also be able to deal with strong emotions that might surface when they're in touch with their body. So it's sort of like a dance. There has to be enough pleasure in your body to want to go into it, so that you can also handle whatever pain and emotion, where emotions will kind of arise in the body. You can't just go right into the pain, right into the pain body. You have to find ways to actually find pleasurable experiences in your body as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like, It's like how Peter Levine talks about that pendulation, right?
Yeah. Tell us more about that.
Well, it's like you can go into the pain, but you have to know that there's a safe place for you to come back to. So when I notice people maybe getting distressed or overactivated or flooded with emotions, I'll bring them back to another sensation in the body that is pleasurable, grounded, and feels good, right? So that they can trust that they can come back from that painful experience, that there's a place to go, that they're not going to stay stuck in that experience in their body, or even if it's physical pain. Same thing with emotional pain. There has to be that pendulation of sort of like, I can go to where I'm uncomfortable, but I also know I can come back to where I feel good again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to kind of have that safety net.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is very interesting. And hopefully, the listeners find it interesting as well. And it sounds like it's something that if someone's interested in using as kind of a tool for their healing, that it seems like they have to work with someone who knows how to do this stuff.
Yes. I also think the simplest things, like I went to an ecstatic dance party last night. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. Well, you go into, there's dance parties in big cities sometimes that are conscious dance parties, where they're a safe a container for people to have experiences, to not be touched unconsensually there, and to basically move in rhythm with one another. So it doesn't always require an expert. It can be as simple as going and dancing, in a safe environment. Like anything that gets you feeling pleasure in your body in a safe way, not, pleasure that could hurt us, but pleasure that's safe and healing. You can seek out those opportunities, and they can even open the door for you to move deeper into your healing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a one-on-one thing, but I always ask people when they come to see me, I'm like, is there anything that you've always really, really wanted to do, but you didn't think you could do it? Like in terms of activities, movement, whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, we got to get you there, right? So sometimes the way in is actually starting with an activity that you've wanted to do. It could be anything, right? I mean, what do you do anything that you really love to do, or anything that you think you'd love to do?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Like in regards to movement?
Yeah.
Let me see. You're gonna put me on the spot here. Well, one thing that comes to mind, I guess, is that like I'm not terribly flexible, and I wish I could be more flexible. I don't know.
Okay.
Is that relevant?
Sure. Yeah. And you want to be more flexible because?
I don't know.
What?
I guess I would like, for when I'm working out and I'm doing stretches, that I could just be able to do more with that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then I guess the next question, if you were a client, I would ask is, well, what feels like it would make your heart sing? Like, what makes you, when you think about being in your body, anything at all, it could be anything, what makes you think you'd experience the most joy? And we're disconnected from that, right? That is like a huge part of who we are as human beings, is to feel joy in every cell of our body. And trauma takes that away. Mm-hmm. Right? We're trying to get to the point where we could feel even glimpses of joy in every cell of our body again. Mm. And how do we get there? Right? Well, it's hard to use our minds to get there, because our minds are part of what are keeping us stuck in repetitive stories and memories, right? That we can't always change with our minds. So how do we do that? Well, we can try to go in through the body. But most people's associations with exercise are kind of shoulds, or I need to, or guilt about not exercising more. And it's really can contribute to shame, right? Of not feeling like you're doing enough or good enough. So that's tricky, right? Because the industry actually tries to guilt people into doing things sometimes, right? So I'm like, what can you do with your body that is actually just makes you happy? You know?
Yeah, I guess that's what it comes down to, right? Just what's going to make you feel good about yourself.
Or feel good in the moment, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I use things at the studio, like I have a trampoline, a little mini trampoline. And it's really can be an effective tool for even the most shut down people, that they get on the trampoline if it's safe for them and they start bouncing. And they're like, oh my goodness, you know? It can be really fun, right? But it's such an important, essential part of healing from trauma, is finding that thing that transcends your past and transcends even the deep work that you might be doing to heal. And it just takes you to that point of feeling light.
Yeah, because we forget to do that. We forget to have fun.
Yeah.
Also seek out the things that feel good, make us feel good.
Yeah, I think of Dr. Rick Hansen, the neuropsychologist. He talks about red zone and green zone, and green zone would be like relate, play, rest, connection with other people. And our bodies really were designed to be in that green zone like 90% of the time. And that red zone of high alert, only about 10%, let's say. But what we're working against, and even more so with people with a history of trauma, is that it's almost flipped the other way. That in our culture, in our society, we're actually not in that green zone very much. We're navigating through traffic. We're dealing with work demands that might exceed the time that we have available. We're rushing around. We're money pressures, right? So our bodies aren't actually in that green zone as much as it is optimal. And then trauma histories make that even worse. So we need to find ways as much as possible to bring ourselves back into that green zone, and play is really helpful for that.
So here's a question then. Is there like a certain amount of time that one should spend each day, trying to enjoy themselves and do something that makes them feel good?
Well,
it's probably relative, but
it's relative. I will say that trauma does, unresolved trauma does really take away people's ability to feel joy. So it can be more complicated, but I would say, as much as possible, even in little moments in your day, get back in your body, get back grounded in your body. So you don't actually take a vacation from your body for very long. But sitting at a desk and a computer for work, without reconnecting with our body, is really hard on our bodies and our minds in the long term. So, and even, at the end of the day, I know people who are exhausted from sitting all day and they go home and then they collapse on the couch. I'm like, well, that's just because your body is just shut down and your chi is stagnant, your life force is stagnant. So I would say as much as possible, get up and move. Optimally, in Canada, we have a recommended 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity movement activities. But one of the issues with not moving enough is that it actually exacerbates stress, because I don't want to get too technical, but when we hit a stress cycle, and we're more prone to stress if we have a history of trauma because our nervous systems are already jacked. But when we hit stress, our body prepares to run or to flee. So if we don't actually move that stress out of our body, we're sort of sitting on the top end of the curve of stress. And then if we have multiple stress cycles in our day without moving, our sedentary living is actually keeping us trapped in almost like a permanent stress cycle. So if we don't regularly move that off It's like our nervous system accumulates and accumulates stress until we're kind of in this different state that isn't really our optimal state. And then you add trauma onto that, and it's really hard. And I know it's so hard for people to move when they don't feel like it, but it's sort of like the CEO part of our brain needs to be like, no, actually, you need to do this, and I'm not going to listen to you, and I'm going to make you get up and do something, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like, for example, I always feel so much better after I exercise, even if I go into it not wanting to do it at that time. It's amazing how that works.
I mean, I have that experience too sometimes, more so in the winter because it's just so cold and dark up here. So, I mean, we all have that experience, but sort of like when we become more regulated in our nervous system, we can sort of have a overriding like parent that can make better decisions for us. You know, someone inside us who can be like, no, you need to actually do this for yourself, or you need to eat lunch and you can't skip lunch, or you need to go to bed early and get a good sleep, or, you know, but that kind of overriding parent in us can kind of shut down when we feel really overwhelmed because we go just into survival mode, just getting through our day or getting through crisis after crisis, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it sounds like just trying to be mindful is going to be really helpful. Do you recommend like meditation as well?
For people who are really dysregulated, meaning like people who are really living in that state of hyper arousal or feeling shut down, I actually, if you're not getting enough movement in your life, I do feel like you have to move before you sit.
Okay.
And I actually turn most movement activities with people into mindful activities. You can walk mindfully, run mindfully, bike mindfully. Like I actually think getting back to sedentary living and what that does to our nervous system and getting caught in stress cycles, I actually think we need to move the stress out of our body before it can be helpful to meditate. And people with a history of trauma can get quite activated, and it can be more distressing to sit still when you aren't grounded in your body. It's sort of like if you're already a sensitive person or you're already quite emotionally distressed, you need to ground yourself first to be able to sit with whatever information you get back during a meditation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think this is really fascinating stuff. But Jane, how would you say that you're doing overall today?
How am I doing? Well, just in the last, I've always been able to function and take care of my business and everything, but I would say in the last year, I felt like I can spread my wings a bit more. I can reach more of my potential. Like a couple years ago, there was kind of a relationship split that I went through that was very traumatizing and sort of a repeat of old patterns. And I was really amazed at the level of support I had around me. And it was it really helped remind me going through that I'm actually have a really big safety net. And that was really helpful. But it also moved me into a different level of healing, a different depth of healing that I haven't really been in before. And I feel like much what Viktor Frankl talks about, a lot of what helped me move through some really tough healing work was really finding a connection with a purpose. I've always been interested in, making people's lives better. But the depth of purpose I feel over the last year and a half especially has been such a huge element of post-traumatic growth for me. So I think we're always recovering from something, though, to varying degrees. So kind of don't ever expect to I'd love to, but get to that point where it's just smooth sailing, like, but I feel like I have better tools and awareness to cope, but I know that I'm going to continue to be in kind of a learning and growth process, but definitely having more fun while I'm doing it now.
That's great. Fun is a good thing. Yeah, and I wanted to ask you too about, you said that you're kind of a highly sensitive person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I consider myself to be a sensitive person as well. And I think, some of the listeners probably fall into that category. And, I don't think that being that way is a bad thing. But sometimes it can be kind of a bit of a burden, right?
Mm.
So how do you kind of deal with that, especially with, the work that you're doing today?
Well, I think every asset or strength we have has a shadow side. So if I think of my sensitivity as a strength, it means I need to really take care of it, and I really need to take care of myself. So if I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired, for example, I know that my sensitivity can be heightened, and I need to focus on self-care. So focusing really on taking good care of myself it's really essential if you're a sensitive person. But I also use it as a superpower. So with my highly sensitive clients, which I would say like a good portion of them are, and for the coaching I do with other movement professionals and healers, I'm like, how can we ground that? How can we make it more intelligent? How can we fine tune it? How can we direct that into something that is more of a power than a weakness, if that makes sense? How can we look at it from a different angle? How can you see yourself not as someone who is overly sensitive, but someone who has a greater ability to pick up on information around them? But I mean, grounded sensitivity is intelligent. Ungrounded sensitivity can make you feel kind of fragile.
Yeah, I love that perspective of, using it as a superpower, as you say, and something that can be used for good. So yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. And have we kind of covered everything that you have going on today? Is there anything else you want to add?
There's so much I could talk about, but I just like the visualization of the healing process is kind of taking an open wound that we might have and gradually giving it enough TLC, enough love, care, self-care in particular, so that wound can kind of morph into a scar, and eventually it's still with us, but it might fade into a scar. It's always there. It's a part of who we are. But our work is really to take our open wounds and transform them into something that's healed over, not something we have to get rid of. And so that we don't get caught in overly identifying with our trauma as who we are. It's a part of who we are, but it's not who we are. We're much more than that, right? We're much more than our trauma histories.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today. And that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Piece of advice. I would probably just, that's a hard one. One piece of advice is that you have more resources available to you, to stop looking at what you're not getting from certain people. It might be family, and start looking at the people who are actually there, who really dig who you are, who really like who you are, who you know are available to you, and start focusing more on the people that are definitely really, really on your side and who you feel really love and accept you.
Yeah, it's good advice. It's so important to have that support, such a key component to healing.
Yeah, we tend to focus on our lack, right? Our brains are trained to focus on what we're missing or what's wrong. And but when you can start feeling the support that's already around you, it builds on itself.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, Jane, before I let you go today, what is the best way for people to connect with you or find out more about everything that you have going on?
Great. Well, you can go to Jane Clapp, Clapp with 2 P's, as in clap your hands. It's really my last name. janeclapp.com. So it's janeclapp.com. You can see what I have going on there. I have some online programs. My Become Your Own Rescuer program, where I teach people self-soothing tools and nervous system regulation tools they can use on their own. Then I also have some professional training programs that I'm offering in Toronto, and some great events that I'm going to be a part of. One in New York with the Breathe Network in August, where we do offering some trauma-informed training to healing arts practitioners to work with people who survive sexual violence. And some, I've kind of upcoming events are there, so you can see if we're in the same city, you can come and see me there. And then also I do online trauma coaching sessions. So that's an option for you as well if you'd like to connect with me and see if I can help you help yourself.
That sounds great. And I will have your website linked up on the show notes page.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I just want to thank you for coming on here today and, for sharing your story with us and for sharing, all the knowledge that you have on the work that you're doing today with body awareness and mindfulness and all that stuff. And hopefully, those listening find it helpful to them in some way. And I think it's definitely a good message to be trying to spread about, getting more movement and having more fun and really focusing more on pleasurable things. Just thank you for coming on and for sharing all of that with us today.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for listening. And I wish you all the best in the work that you're doing and all the stories that you're sharing.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 84. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Jane Clapp, and that's with 2 P's, to find the links mentioned during this episode or to leave a comment. So after having this conversation with Jane, I really want to take the time here to encourage you to try to be more mindful in your life. And believe me, I know that that's often easier said than done, but I also think that it's something really worth trying to do because there can be so many benefits to it. And especially, for those of us who come from traumatic backgrounds, like we were talking about here in the episode, we often, forget to have fun, or it's just not top of mind. But it's so important, and it's important to incorporate movement into our day as well. So I really encourage you just to try to be more mindful and try to, incorporate things into your life on whatever level you can. If it's daily, great, weekly, but just try to do things for you. Try to focus on having some fun, even if that doesn't seem realistic for you right now, and just to incorporate that movement as well and see how that goes for you. See what kind of difference that can make for you. So just give it a try, that's all, and go from there, And I'd also like to encourage you to come back next week. I'm going to be joined by Jacob Nordby. He is the author of The Divine Arsonist and Blessed Are the Weird, and he's going to talk about how he's had to heal from growing up in a cult, but we're also going to talk about so much more, and we're going to get into philosophies on life and just really good stuff in that episode. And if you've ever, felt like the outsider or like you don't fit in, then this one's definitely for you. And just as a reminder, if you want to check out that deal from Audible to get the free audiobook download along with the 30-day free trial, that's at thegrassgetsgreener.com/audible. And of course, don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher if you haven't yet to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And as always, have hope.